Our final NFL DFS slate of the year is coming up on Sunday. It is Super Bowl 56 between the Rams and the Bengals, which means one last chance to win some cash on the NFL before a long hiatus, before we get back to some football once again. So let's savor it, let's win some money, and go out on a high note for the 2021 season. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor of numberFire.com. Brandon, it is our final NFL podcast of the year. I am sad about that, but happy we get to break down a pretty fun game with a lot of exciting dudes attached to it. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun game to break down because, like you said, we have engaging skill position players. We have 5 names that, well, let me think here. Both quarterbacks, Kupp, Mixon, Chase, T. I don't think I'd go past that.
I don't know if I go to T even personally.
For MVP. But 5. I think 5 justifiable options at MVP. Yeah. That's fun. So I'm all for that.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that we have the ability to deviate without being stupid, to me, is the main appeal of this single game slate. So what we're going to do today is break down a single game slate from a strategy perspective, break down this game, talk through some injuries, break down our MVP thoughts, and much more to get you set for everything you need to know for Super Bowl 56. But first, FanDuel's bringing Super Bowl bingo to your Super Bowl party. And it doesn't matter if you're watching the game with hardcore fans or someone who is just there to watch the commercial. Super Bowl bingo is perfect for everyone, and it's absolutely free to play. Here's how it works. You can get your free card now at FanDuel.com or down on the FanDuel app. Then on game day, as Super Bowl and pop culture moments on your card happen, your squares will automatically fill up. And if you get 5 squares in a row, all you do is press bingo to win a share of $100,000 in prizes. FanDuel is the exclusive home for Super Bowl bingo. Grab your free card now, so you're all set for game day. Opt in to FanDuel's Super Bowl bingo contest today. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL and Super Bowl 56. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. It is weird to be able to say Super Bowl in these ads. That's a new thing with this partnership. So, hey, at least we got that going for us.
The big game.
Super Bowl, Super Bowl, Super Bowl. Suck it. There we go. Got that out of the way. Okay, let's break down the Super Bowl 56 here between the Rams and the Bengals. Right now, the Rams are 4-point favorites at FanDuel. They are 4.5-point favorites. Some other places, noteworthy. But either way, 4-point favorites are the Rams. 48.5-point total. Injuries to note here for this slate. We got Tyler Higby still missing practice on Wednesday due to his knee injury. I think it seems pretty grim for him to play personally. I've read elsewhere that maybe he'll go, but Sean McVay doesn't seem to think so.
And if he goes, he's probably not going to play in full capacity. Might do still some high leverage work, which would be unfortunate.
And he'd probably cancel out Kendall Blanton, which would be super, super fun. I don't think Higby's going to go. Van Jefferson also did get in a limited session on Wednesday. Cam Akers limited, so that's good. Higby news, not great. On the Bengals side, CJ Uzomah was not able to practice Wednesday. He said he's not going to miss this game. Zach Taylor said after practice that they still felt as though Uzomah would be able to play. So if we're talking right now on Thursday morning, I am assuming that Uzomah goes, Higby does not, but I'm assuming Uzomah probably pretty heavily limited with that knee injury. So the tight end stuff not looking great for this game. We'll break down what that means from a player level perspective later on. But first, this is our only single game podcast we have for the entire year, which means it's important to dig into strategy. And who better to talk to you about that than Brandon freaking Gadula? Wrote a piece a couple years ago over on numberFire.com breaking down the data behind how a single game slates break. And you updated that data over on numberFire this week. You can find that on Brandon's Twitter account. He tweeted that out yesterday. It does have updated data from the 2020 and 2021 seasons to let you know what the typical MVP outlook is, the relationship between positions, et cetera, et cetera. So Brandon, if you were to give us a TLDR on what we should be looking for here, what we're looking for as single game slates, what did you find in that piece?
All the all games
I don't know.
or
It could be
this
just this
game?
one, just in general.
Okay.
What do we need to know?
So the one thing that's important to keep in mind is that obviously not all games in the NFL are the same. So you're not going to say, okay, so in single game slates, you want a quarterback, you want a running back, you want two receivers and a tight end. Like that's what happens. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on things like over under, point total, spreads, things like that. So it's hard to talk about everything, on air because the numbers can just sort of like gloss over you. So I would recommend that if you're curious about the overall trends, that you go to numberFire. The piece is called "How to Dominate Single Game Daily Fantasy Football with Perfect Lineup Analysis." That will help you key in on there are things like, okay, when a quarterback is MVP, what does that lineup tend to look like more compared to when the running back is the MVP? So that is going to help you dictate whenever you're saying, hey, I want to play, and this is a name that I think you and I both love at MVP this week, Joe Mixon at MVP. What does that sort of change about the rest of the lineup? And again, it's a lot of averages and it's a lot of frequency stuff, because if you play out millions of NFL games, you're going to get like a Mixon Stafford Cup stack that like you wouldn't normally anticipate. But again, it's sort of overall trends. So I would point everyone to that. But as it pertains to this game specifically, I pulled from my database 43 games since 2019 with a single game slate offering on FanDuel with a total of 46.5 to 55.5 or 50.5, sorry, and a spread between 3 and 5. Try to keep the spread a little bit narrower, the over under a little bit more in this range. So typically a quarterback is the optimal MVP about 45% of the time in the overall sample. In games comparable to this, it falls to 23%. So that is a massive drop off of 21 points. What we see then is a trend up for running backs from 29% overall to 44% in this split. And then for receivers, it's about 21% overall and about 26% in games like this. That's why historically, quarterbacks are great MVP picks. However, in games like this where there might not be a lot of scoring, as much as, games with a 50 plus point total, we might have a more likely play at running back or receiver. And then we have to apply that to the specific game. Does it make sense that we wouldn't want to play any running backs from this game at MVP? Yes, with Joe Mixon. We'll talk more about the Rams running backs later. With Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, that makes sense. So it's you have to blend the trends with the actual game itself. Now, here's the final thing I'll say, and then we can kind of open this up a little bit more. If you're playing this from an under perspective, then you would shy away more from the quarterbacks at MVP based on what this data says. If you say, I think the total's too low, this game's going to have 60 total points, it's going to play more like a game with a total of 55, then the quarterbacks are going to be much more justifiable at MVP. However, you're realistically getting leverage every time you play a running back or receiver at MVP based on the field, because people love to roster quarterbacks, because on FanDuel, everyone's the same salary, whether you play them at MVP or at flex. So that's kind of the overview. I think the real takeaway is that this game sets up well for Joe Mixon, for Cooper Kupp, and for Jamar Chase to be your MVP choice, depending on how you choose, however you think the game's going to go. And that goes into something you talk about all the time when you build your main slate lineups, is making your assumptions, talking about how you think the game's going to play. That is vital for a single game. DFS.
Yeah, because you don't want to use players who don't interact well. Like you can use, I don't know what the best example of this would be, but like two guys who are best in opposite scripts. So
I would say usually tight ends and running backs who can be a little bit more touchdown dependent. If you're really in on a running back, I'm a little bit lower on tight ends just because that tight ends need touchdowns generally. Very few of them have yardage upside. So that's the one correlation I try to look at a lot. Not to say I never do it, not to say I won't do it this weekend, but that is the sort of my go-to for single game.
Yeah, so for me, I just like decide the way you think the game will play out and go from there. Like if you think the Bengals win by 10, that's a very different lineup than the Rams winning by 3. So decide that first and go from there. But also it's important to note that like the field may assume the same thing. So for me on single game slates, I prefer to play single entry and I want to think through, okay, where am I going to get the best leverage on the field in a way that I'm not being stupid? Be different without being dumb. That's kind of my key thing I want to look for always. I think that Joe Mixon is actually the optimal way to do so. So we'll talk about that later on, but I think the data backs this up with seeing running backs at the MVP slot so frequently. So I think to me, just confirmation bias. Like I entered this wanting to use Mixon at MVP because I thought that he'd be under rostered. Then I see your data on this split and see that running backs are in the MVP slot 44% of the time in similar games. It leads me to feel pretty good about that. And like honestly, anecdotally, the quarterback stuff makes sense because the higher the total, the more touchdowns are implied. The lower the total, the more often you expect those red zone trips to be field goals versus touchdowns. So like Brandon said, if you in your head are expecting a shootout, then you should be inclined to use the quarterbacks. If you're expecting this game to go under, then the kickers have more viability because it's fewer chances converted into touchdowns. So thinking about it in that way, I think is necessary for this for sure. And just having an idea of the way you think this game will play out in that specific lineup. Because if you're doing multi-entry, you can do multiple different ways. And for single entry too, you should do multiple lineups. So like not in the same contest, obviously, but like you do a $5 single entry with one lineup, you do a $10 single entry with a separate lineup. That way you're effectively getting multiple entries just in different contests. I think that's a way we should think of things here. So let's spin that now to the MVP conversation and talk about guys we think grade out well in that regard for this week. And this is different if you're playing a cash game. Obviously, I don't tend to play cash games for a single game personally. But for me, if I'm looking at a single entry tournament, I think that Joe Mixon is kind of a rock star level play under the assumption that he will be under rostered by the field here, because this goes back to work you've done on the PGA side of things, knowing that the highest salaried person is likely to get a lot of consideration. That for this slate is Cooper Kupp at $16,000 over on FanDuel. That means Cooper Kupp's MVP allocation will increase as a result of his salary. But behind me is Stafford and Burrow. And in general, like you said, people love to use quarterbacks as MVP. So if I'm like allocating expected MVP shares across the entire pool of players, I feel like the field, a large percentage of the time will be going to Kupp, Stafford, Burrow. And if they go to the Bengals, it might be Jamar Chase versus Joe Mixon, given Chase has, had some bananas. Yeah, he's had a ceiling, that's for sure. To me, that means Mixon will likely go over or under rostered, which is interesting because in the playoffs, Mixon is at 17 carries, 5 targets per game, 98.7 yards in scrimmage per game. He has 48% of the team's red zone opportunities, so carries or targets inside the red zone. That is slightly up from what it was during the regular season. It's 44% for his full games this year. And the other thing that leads me to believe Mixon will be under rostered is that his betting markets have been sour, I would say. His rushing plus receiving yardage total was in the mid 90s last week. It's at 87.5 over on FanDuel. I think it's still, I saw some 92s lingering last night. But like, it's been coming down. I don't think it should. I think 87.5 is an overreaction, and I'll take the over on that personally. That leads me to believe people who are putting their money on the line for this game don't think that Mixon's going to do a whole lot here. I think he will. So to me, that's why I'm looking for leverage, looking for a guy who will be under rostered relative to the field. I think that guy is Joe Mixon. If you give me one lineup for a tournament to try to, maximize my ROI, I'm putting Joe Mixon at MVP personally for those reasons. What about you? What's your read on MVP and that market in general?
Yeah, I had an idea on the fly. I was trying to pull up. Okay, so according to my database here, let's assume a running back is the MVP, his draft percentage as MVP, if he's favored, is about 16%. If he's an underdog, it's about 12%. So it's not a huge gap, but anyone who plays a lot of single game will take 4 points of leverage anywhere they can get.
Absolutely.
So that speaks to Joe Mixon as well. And if anyone's wondering, hey, like Joe Mixon sounds great, but he's an underdog and should be wary of that. If you break out the MVPs again in comparable games to this one based on spread and over under, those 43 that I've referenced, 18.6% of those had an underdog running back as the MVP. By comparison, it was 26% for a favored running back and 23% for a favored receiver. But again, both of those are better than the quarterback. So you then also have to apply that to a particular game, because how many of these games had a running back with Joe Mixon's workload on the other side as an underdog? It doesn't, I'm not digging that deep into adjusting for pre-game projections, but this speaks to Joe Mixon as well, because we're looking at a situation where Joe Mixon there's like sort of Joe Mixon fatigue, but the total here is not like sky high. And that's one thing that really draws me toward running backs and would draw me toward the Rams running backs if we had a featured back entering this game, which we don't. So I don't want to get to that point with the Rams running backs. But speaking of Mixon, great red zone role. We know he's going to be on the field. We might question the third down role a little bit with Samaje Perine being able to take a target or two, and his touchdown I know is going to stick in a lot of people's minds. We should take advantage of that, and I think that Joe Mixon is the best differentiation play at MVP. So I'm in total agreement with you with Mixon. And if we're talking single entry, I think that Mixon is going to be my MVP of choice in a single entry lineup.
Okay, so let's talk to the other guys here as far as MVP considerations, because not everyone will be swayed by the Mixon argument, which is fair. Totally fine. I get that. We have Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. For me, I think those are the only non-Mixon guys I want to use. T. Higgins, I'm not as high on. Looking back at the Bengals games this year, I omitted week 18 when Joe Burrow sat and T. Higgins sat too. If we look at the other games they played this year, I did include the games where Higgins sat, just whatever. Anyway, in those the other games where everyone's played, Joe Mixon has been the highest scoring player on the Bengals 6 times. Jamar Chase has also been the MVP of their team 6 times. Burrow 4 times, and then Higgins, Boyd, and Uzama once apiece. If we look at just the wins, because we're assuming if we put the guy at MVP that his team will win for the most part. In the wins, it's Mixon and Chase at 4, Burrow at 3, Uzama 1, Boyd 1, Higgins 0. So Higgins could be the highest scoring guy, but I'm not going to have 1,600 lineups. So I need to cut down my MVP core somewhere. And I feel like the best way to do so is via having not as much, probably no T. Higgins at MVP. So to me, that's my consideration set. Do you want to make a pitch on putting Higgins at MVP or no?
It's honestly a leverage play. It's the fact that in the playoffs, he actually has a higher air yard share than Jamar Chase, although it's not substantially high. I mean, they're both 35+%. I mean, this passing offense flows through those two all the time. And Jamar Chase has a better catch rate over expected in the playoffs, 6.6 points over expected, 3.3 for Higgins. So they're both over expectation, which you would anticipate because they're both good receivers. 6.6 is a bit high. And look, I've tried to study what leads to what lead-in information we can use to anticipate big games from receivers. And there's really nothing. It's a matter of, did this guy have an abnormally high catch rate and yards per target and touchdown rate in that game when he got volume that he's typically getting in weeks before? That's all it comes down to. So I'm not saying Jamar Chase is a bad MVP play because he's been overperforming. That's not it. It's that he's been overperforming a little bit more than Higgins, whose role is not substantially different than what Jamar Chase does. Now, Jamar Chase also has run after a catch ability that Higgins doesn't really have. But if you're looking for a way to go chalky with your full lineup, but differentiate in a way that makes sense, I think Higgins at MVP can get you there.
Okay.
That is one way to think about how you would play. Because if you play Cooper Kupp, you're going to want to play. So let's say you play Cooper Kupp at MVP, you're going to want to play Matthew Stafford because that's what the data says. Historically, you want to play an opposing receiver because you're playing that sort of shootout role in this game. Let's say you have Kupp, Stafford, Chase. You have 8,250 left. If you do stuff like that, you're going to have to dig pretty deep into the player pool. And if you want to avoid taking chances because you say it's the Super Bowl, there's really not going to be like a hero this week. I think that Tyler Higby will be back, and they don't want to play Kendall Blanton. I think Van Jefferson's hurt. I don't want to do that. You can build a more balanced lineup and put T. Higgins at MVP. So that's one option. And as much as I want to say that's the play, I'm just trying to throw out like other like ideas because I don't know what's going to happen on Sunday. I can tell you what's going to happen statistically over 10,000 Sundays, which puts Cooper Kupp into the MVP slot at a 28% rate, followed by Matthew Stafford at 25%, Burrow at 17%, Mixon 12%, and Chase at 10%. So again, Kupp is the chalk at MVP. I think you can still play him. You don't have to go away from Cooper Kupp.
No.
But if you do that, just again, think about that you're probably playing more of an over angle than you are with an under for Kupp.
Looking at the Rams side of things, talked about how often each guy was the highest scoring player on their team for the Bengals. On the Rams side, it has only been Kupp or Stafford in 18 out of their 20 games. Kupp has done it 9 times, Stafford 9 times, Bobby Trees, missed you, buddy. He's won. Sony Michel won. If we look at their wins, it's 7 for Cooper Kupp, 6 for Matthew Stafford, 1 for Woods, 1 for Michel. If we look just since their bye, so taking out Bobby Trees, again, shout out Bobby Trees, and adding in Odell Beckham, it's 5 for Kupp, 4 for Stafford, 1 for Michel. And the reason I want to look at that specifically was because has Odell Beckham cut into Cooper Kupp's role enough where I might want to lower Kupp at MVP? And the answer is a pretty resounding no. If we look in just the playoffs, so where Odell Beckham, I don't know why I was tripped up on the D. Odell Beckham's role has been a lot better. In the playoffs, Cooper Kupp has a 33% target share, Beckham at 24%. Kupp leads the team with a 29% deep target share, and he has 50% of the red zone targets. So his role has not gotten worse. In fact, it's potentially gotten better, which is bananas. So even if I try to talk myself out of Kupp at MVP, I can't. So I think it makes sense. I think that what I would want to do is get a read on what the MVP allocation of Kupp relative to Stafford is. Kupp's the highest salary guy. Your simulations say he is the most likely. If I get the read that Kupp will be more popular at MVP than Stafford, then I'm okay pivoting to Stafford because I think that it's pretty even between those two guys. Just tough because I know the baseline is quarterback at MVP. I feel like that will still be the case. So I wouldn't be shocked if Kupp is less popular than Stafford, but it's very hard for me personally to get a read on that situation.
I've often found that my slate simulations and the MVP odds are pretty decent with predicting MVP roster rates. I think that you're going to get some leverage going to Stafford from Kupp, but not substantially so. Just to kind of throw that out there. And if you're playing Stafford then at MVP, my follow-up is, are you going to try to fade Kupp because you think that because you're obviously anticipating a big game from Stafford if he's going to be the highest scoring player? Are you trying to fade Kupp and play him with Van and Odell? Or are you still going to play Kupp in those lineups? I know you play Kupp in some lineups, but let's say you're building a single entry with Stafford. Do you think you would go so far as to say, I'm just going to avoid Kupp? If he has a bad game, he has 60 yards, no touchdowns, and Stafford. One thing I want to talk about is Stafford's goal line role. The Rams have they've had the highest rate all season, or in the regular season, of percentage of touchdowns from inside the 10 coming from the pass, which says that Matthew Stafford should not score rushing touchdowns, but he's had 2 in the playoffs. But inside the 3 in the playoffs, they've had 1 pass play and 6 rushes. Stafford has 3 of those. He's tied for the NFL lead in goal line rushes in the playoffs.
He's getting those rushes because he's terrible at them, and he gets like 3 per crack because he just can't.
He's
the worst sneaker on the planet.
I'm just saying, like, it's the Super Bowl, it's the playoffs. Stafford might just be going for it. So, you could be playing the angle. Stafford's going to rush for 1. He's going to throw 1 to Odell, 1 to Van, or something like that, and it's not going to be Kupp. So again, single entry lineup. You're playing Stafford at MVP. Do you think you'll play Kupp with him?
I answer your question with another question. What are your thoughts on Kupp at MVP but no Stafford? Because if you use Cooper Kupp and Odell Beckham in the same lineup without Matthew Stafford, you're effectively getting exposure to a healthy portion of Stafford's production without using Stafford. I think that I might be more interested in that. I'm not sure if the data says that this is the stupidest thing I've ever brought up in my entire life, but I think that thought process of absorbing their production without using them, to me at least, is pretty interesting. So I think that I'm giving more thought to that than having Stafford without Kupp. I think that what you're asking is valid because you're just kind of assuming that Kupp doesn't go nuclear, which is if he has 6 catches, 100 yards, and no touchdowns, that's a very good game.
Yes.
But he could still not be in the optimal lineup in that situation.
Yeah. So again, we can talk about playoff usages and things like that, but when it comes to single game, it's a time to talk about game theory.
Yeah.
So we're talking about what kind of game script are you selling yourself if you have Kupp and Odell in your lineup and not Stafford? What you're really saying is Kupp's probably going to break 100 yards, have a touchdown. Odell probably scores, has 60, 70 yards. But Stafford himself, those are his only 2 passing touchdowns. He throws for 250. That's what you're saying. It's could that happen? Yeah, absolutely. That's not a strange game script. So that makes sense. So I think that every time you're building a lineup, I know it's fun to go through an optimizer and just max the 150 in a single game and just be I'm going to hit the right combo. But you want to make sure that you're looking at your lineup and saying, does this even make sense? And I think in that specific instance, it makes sense. You can have a receiver at MVP, you can have another receiver and not the quarterback. I'll try to look up the numbers here on the fly. I'll let you know what that looks like. But it's not that egregious in that specific instance because you're not looking. This is different than a main slate where you wouldn't really play 2 receivers on the same team without the quarterback. But we're looking at one game. So we're trying to cherry pick the 5 best per salary dollar options within a single game. So I think there's credence there. And I think that's an interesting route to go because if you don't play Stafford, presumably you'll still play Burrow in that lineup. But if you fade both quarterbacks, that would be, if you want to get unique, fading both quarterbacks in a lineup is probably going to get you very, very unique, not totally unique because unique means literally unique, but you won't be having as many duplicates if you don't have quarterbacks in your lineup.
The Big Game Bowl on FanDuel has $3.3 million in total prizes. I want to check out the total number of entries. 792,858. The odds you get a unique there are very low. The odds you get a unique that is not idiotic, very, very low. So keep that in mind. For sure. Okay. Let's talk about Joe Burrow. You brought him up. Where does he grade out for you, considering roster rates at MVP compared to Kupp and Stafford?
So he's going to be behind the Rams because this is one thing we haven't really talked about and I wanted to cover is what are our expectations for the game? For me, it's that the Rams win and that it plays a little bit under, but not drastically so, plays close to what the total is now, which isn't going to get me that different unless I build a different lineup.
Yeah.
I love Joe Burrow. I'm rooting for Joe Burrow, but if you look at a lot of information, the one thing that jumped out to me is the Bengals receivers and catch rate over expectation in the playoffs. They're all overperforming. We've seen the Bengals get off to slow starts. It's something I wrote about on numberFire. They're really bad in the first quarter on early drives. And then Burrow kind of has to take over a game, that's not really a recipe I want to bank on. And because perception seems to be like the hype train is out of control with Joe Burrow, which again, I'm all for, but I'm going to probably play against that this week and not really be heavy on Joe Burrow unless I am playing Mixon, because Mixon running backs are often paired with their quarterbacks because you're just getting passing efficiency and then red zone chances, which lead to running back touchdowns. But I'm really not going to approach this with an angle of any Joe Burrow MVP lineups. I think I'm going to play Mixon, Kupp, and potentially Stafford at MVP. Those are probably my big three.
Yeah,
which I am going to fear, but I have my reasons for Burrow, and I think it's because the early game tendencies being suboptimal and being forced into throwing, which the Rams are a little bit scarier than some of these other defenses he's faced in the playoffs.
I think I'm a little bit higher on him than you are. And I think I'm higher on him than Stafford personally. Because after I consider roster rates, I think Stafford will be more popular. I agree with you in the way the game will play out from a baseline.
Yeah.
Because like my numbers have it as Rams minus 4.2. Total
minus 4.4. Yeah.
I do not have a total model. I should build that for next year. But like looking at the projected efficiency numbers, it seems pretty appropriate, the total right now. So I do think the Rams win. However, when I account for the fact that I think the other guys will be more popular, that helps. Also, I kind of want to come at this from the angle, and this may be antithetical to my Mixon love. I want to come at this from the angle that the Bengals are more pass heavy than expectation because they've been more pass heavy than expectation recently. These high leverage games, if you look at their past 5 games with Joe Burrow, their early down first half pass rate is 66%. They have been above 70% in 3 out of those 5 games. So if I come at it from the angle of, okay, the Bengals getting pooped on by Tony Romo for 6.5 hours 2 weeks ago for being too conservative, that sticks in people's minds. Maybe I want to take the angle of they're aggressive. Now, that doesn't mean that is not actually antithetical to the Mixon love, because like you said, passing breeds red zone chances, breeds touchdowns, breeds points. Mixon benefits from that, and he is involved in the passing game. Like, again, 5 targets per game during the playoffs for Joe Mixon, so that's not antithetical. But that's why I want to be high on Burrow. Whereas with Stafford, if I'm thinking about this from the Bengals' perspective, I wouldn't be shocked if they take the same game plan they had against the Chiefs, where they're dropping 8 into coverage to make sure they're not letting Kupp, Beckham, Van beat them deep. Maybe that encourages the Rams to run more. Maybe it encourages more dump offs, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there are a couple of like things in my head that lead me to think the Bengals may be the more aggressive team here, which feels weird. And when I do that in my head, that leads me to Burrow over Stafford. So I think I'm higher on Burrow than you are and higher on him than Stafford. Again, for tournaments. For if we're not talking tournaments, I'm not caring about roster rates. Sure, go Stafford. But if I'm trying to think about things relative to roster rate, I kind of like Joe Burrow.
Yeah, and I mean, again, our baseline is that for both of us is that the line's pretty efficient. Mm-hmm. We lean on the Rams, but don't have a strong take. It's not like we're saying Rams by 20. Mm-hmm. It's not like we're saying Bengals by 10 or anything like that. So we're kind of in consensus. So you have to figure out how to go from there. And again, I think that you and I both have Mixon as our single game. Like if we could build one lineup this weekend, I think Mixon would be our MVP. Despite the fact that our baseline is that the Rams win. If I didn't care about roster rates and game theory, I would play Cooper Kupp at MVP.
Correct.
And not worry. So that's kind of the trouble of talking about a single game slate is you have to measure what you think is most likely versus where you think you can gain the most leverage.
Yep.
Speaking of the aggression stuff, it's funny that you say that because I know you look at the data. It feels like people would assume that the Bengals are the much more aggressive, like downfield passing team, but that's really not the case. The Rams throw downfield more often in terms of volume and in terms of percentage of plays. Stafford has a higher ADOT than Burrow as well. I would love to see what happens if the Bengals just play off because Matthew Stafford leads the NFL in EPA per dropback when not pressured. And he falls to about league average when pressured.
Yeah.
which is roughly the same for Joe Burrow. This is something I covered on numberFire in a big analytical preview. Is like a lot of people talking about the Joe Burrow under pressure. The Rams have all these pass rushers, but the Rams pass, like, their pressure rate's not that good. But both quarterbacks play very good from a clean pocket and about league average when pressured. So if the Bengals do drop off, I feel pretty good with Stafford being able to throw underneath to Cooper Kupp, who can generate yards after catch. Odell Beckham still has some of that. Last week, I mean, Van Jefferson's ADOT was crazy. So they'll still probably take some shots downfield, or at least be able to stretch the field with man and open things up. Because I think if you play, if you try to get to Stafford, that's the real goal. I think that should be their goal.
I mean, you want degas Stafford or like mistake prone Stafford. Yeah.
Right. But if they don't try to pressure, if they don't bring the blitz, their blitz rate's actually down since they got Von Miller.
Because they don't need to.
Right. But they're also not getting to the quarterback at a higher rate, which was already league average before that split. So let's take the baseline here just for argument. They're not going to get to Stafford very often. He's probably going to find Kupp in the short and intermediate game or spread the field with Van Jefferson. So I have a hard time going away from Stafford for Burrow. And if I'm playing the Bengals heavy lineups, I'm still going to play Mixon or probably at that rate Jamar Chase.
Yeah.
And hope that Chase has like, the 70-yard touchdown and just heavy volume. Because, watching this, I've been railing a little bit on the Bengals early game data, but they kind of, I wouldn't be surprised if Jamar Chase has like 5 first quarter targets and they throw it to him the first 3 plays of the game.
Yeah. So this is like the issue with having just one game to look at is you can kind of find stuff to like
everything.
Yeah. And like, if you go to next gen stats and filter by what guys have done against 3 or fewer rushers. So like kind of exactly what the Bengals are doing against the Chiefs. Stafford in that split has 83 dropbacks, including the playoffs, pass attempts, including the playoffs. His CPOE, completion percentage over expectation, is minus 6.2. His EPA per dropback is 0.07. So he's above average in that split, but like not hugely so, whereas Joe Burrow's at 0.47. Also touchdown Trevor Siemian, 0.46 on 9 attempts. So go Cats.
So your viewers, that's the small sample.
It's 83 pass attempts, but that is exactly what the Bengals did. And against Patrick Mahomes in that second half. So it sticks in my mind. It's enough where I am not out on Stafford, but I think I can justify going to Burrow there. Let's open things up here and go beyond the MVP conversation and talk about other things influencing the lineups. Let's talk about this Rams backfield, because to me, that is a very interesting component here, because we went through the entire MVP discussion and did not bring up Cam Akers, despite the fact that in the divisional round, he had an 80% snap rate. The reason we did not bring up Cam Akers is because his conference championship role was doo-doo. Even before his injury, he was being taken off the field on third downs for Sony Michel. And the broadcast said that was because the team thought Michel was the better pass blocker. So to me, that says we can probably assume Sony Michel be out there on third downs again this week. Overall, for that conference championship game, Michel is out there for 14 out of 18 third down snaps. Again, Akers missed time due to a shoulder injury. Akers is out there for 3 third down snaps. That also took place toward the goal line. So from 12 yards and in, the Rams ran 6 plays, and none of those occurred in the second quarter when Akers was out with that shoulder injury. On those 6 plays, Michel played 4 snaps. Akers played 2. So to me, everything here lines up to say Cam Akers is going to lose high leverage work, whether it be in the passing game or at the goal line. He's probably going to lose those opportunities we need to really have a huge DFS day. His salary is $10,000. I think that's like weirdly appropriate. I was expecting to be higher and to be like super turned off. I think that's fair. But I think the takeaway to me is that Michel at $7,500 is on the map. He's on the table for that salary. If he's going to get some passing game work, maybe some goal line work, I think that's why I'm pretty low on Akers and interested in Michel as a value play. What are you doing with the Rams backfield?
So they're going to be definitely not core plays by any sense. They're going to be rotational pieces at best for me. One thing that is in that, just if we kind of combine what we were just talking about with pressure rate and the quarterbacks and Sony Michel being out there to pass block, Cincinnati actually is top 7 in pressure rate. So that's an angle that could lead to more work for Sony Michel, or more snaps, maybe not necessarily more work. But if you are building a running back committee that would be preferable for DFS players, you'd say just give me one guy who gets goal line work and pass catching work.
Yeah.
And we're kind of getting that right now.
Yeah.
And he's at the lower salary with Sony Michel. I'm not saying that Sony Michel is a slam dunk play. I don't know what Darrell Henderson's going to do, because it sounds like he's going to return. Probably not going to be heavily involved, but we don't know. And you and I talk all the time about, you can make assumptions, but don't assume that you know what's going to happen. You have to in a single game slate, so it's a little bit less important, or it's a little bit more forgivable to say, Darrell Henderson's actually going to have a big role. None of them they're all going to play 33% of the snaps. I'm not touching any of them. Like, that's fine. If it was a main slate, I think you just stay away from this anyway. But I would definitely rate Michel over Cam Akers at the salary. And even if they were the same salary, I would go with Sony Michel.
I don't know if I go that far, but I think if you were to toss in expected roster rates, then I would, which is what we have to do because we're talking tournaments here.
Yeah.
Because Akers, like, based on the betting markets, people still think Cam Akers is a good role, and I don't think he really does. Like, his rushing plus receiving yardage prop is 4 yards lower than Mixon's. I don't know why that's the case. His rushing yardage prop is 64.5. I think that one's fair because, like, again, if the Bengals are going to drop 8, I can see the Rams being more run heavy, trying to take advantage of the soft coverages, et cetera, et cetera. So the yardage number, the rushing yardage number I get, the rushing plus receiving, I think people are going to be a bit higher on him than I want to be personally. So we talk about using optimizers. If I were using an optimizer, I would use one that allows me to alter their projections, or use my own. I would go in and manually lower Akers' third down work and rushing touchdown share as a result of the way I expect his role to pan out. I would manually change those things in order to get their allocations to reflect the role I expect him to play for this game. I will still use Akers because maybe
the salary's not that. The salary's
fine. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So, like, the salary's fine. So I can totally be okay with him, but I want to make sure I'm heavier on Michel relative to the field. I looked at some projected roster rates. They are projecting Akers to be pretty popular. Michel, not as much. I get it.
And when I pulled numbers yesterday, I had Cam Akers at minus 105 for an anytime touchdown. He's now minus 110, which isn't massive, but it again is trending toward, like, Cam Akers being a little bit more involved. Sony Michel, though, I did have it plus 300. I now see him on FanDuel Sportsbook at plus 240.
Yeah.
So not a whole lot of help there.
If you go to, like, I'm pretty sure at Bet Rivers you can bet to not score a touchdown. I might check out Cam Akers in that market. Because if he's minus 110 to score, he'd probably be, given the way they choose these markets, probably like minus 130 to not score. I'd have some interest there.
Cooper Kupp's minus 165 to score.
I can't even, like, I can't talk myself out. It's fine. Yeah, it makes sense. Like, he's just absurd. Mixon was the best value. He was plus 115, and the value's gone. So sad day. Pouring out for old Joe over there. And we got a question on YouTube from Geek Hippie asking if Akers in the doghouse, those 2 fumbles. Yes, I think that's 100% what we saw in the conference championship game. That's why Michel was in there on the goal line, because Akers lost those high leverage touches, those high leverage fumbles. And I think that's why he's out there for pass blocking too. So yes, I think that's pretty directly why we saw that role change again before his injury during the conference championship game. Okay, so that's the Rams backfield. Let's talk here about the non-MVP wide receivers, Odell Beckham and T. Higgins. Looking at these two guys over on FanDuel, we have Odell checking in at $10,500, T. Higgins $10,500. Also, Cam Akers at $10,000. So, who's your pick between those three? Because they're kind of similar. I'm expecting Odell to be pretty popular based on Twitter sentiments, based on media hype. I'm expecting Odell to catch a lot of popularity. I'm probably higher on T, though. What about you?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's going to be T. Higgins because I can justify, and this is not perfect. And the salary for Jamar Chase at 12,000 is really not substantially hard to get to. But you're going to be building lineups where you don't have 12,000 and you have 10.5 or 11.5, and you're like, for how good T. Higgins' role is, and for how kind of he's underperformed a bit relative to some expectation, like I'm okay going with T. Higgins and assuming a pretty like decent portion of Jamar Chase's workload. I'm not doing that with Odell Beckham and saying he can kind of replicate and replace Cooper
Right.
Kupp. Like it's going to take a very specific down game for Kupp to be outscored by Odell Beckham. It's going to take a T. Higgins game, to outscore Jamar Chase. Like that's much more
Which we
realistic.
saw last week or 2
Like,
weeks ago.
so I think that T. Higgins is the best play out of those three by a pretty solid margin. Especially I don't have the workload concerns with Cam Akers, and I don't have like the yardage. I still have some yardage upside concerns with Odell. His role is getting really good, so I don't want to downplay that. But I would lean T. Higgins as an underdog, and I think he fits with mix and lineups because he can have yardage upside without scoring. But he also fits with whenever I'm going with Cooper Kupp because you almost always want to run that back with opposing pass catchers.
Yeah.
T helps offset that salary from Cooper Kupp or with Matthew Stafford. So I think he kind of fits with all three MVPs that I'm considering playing.
Yeah, with T, the reason I like him more is just downfield work. He has a 46% deep target share in the playoffs. Jamar Chase is also 46% because it's just those two guys who get deep work for this team. Whereas Odell's at 24%. That's actually tied with Van Jefferson for second on the team behind Cooper Kupp. I know, like you said, I agree with you. You kind of alluded to this, but like I'm still skeptical of the yardage upside for Beckham, despite the fact he was awesome during the conference championship. I still have some worries there, especially because like the way you want to attack this Bengals team is in the middle of the field because that's where they're weakest, and that's a Cooper Kupp situation more so than it is a Odell Beckham thing. Whereas with the Bengals versus the Rams, you kind of want to just go whoever's not on wherever Jalen Ramsey's not, and like he can't cover both guys. I would expect him to play more outside corner than he did during the regular season. He had a 34% slot snap rate during the regular season. They did use him to shadow Mike Evans for the most part. 69% of Evans' routes were against Ramsey in that game. I wouldn't be shocked if he shadows Chase. I'm not assuming he does. That would not scare me off of Chase because Mike Evans still toasted him. And like Jamar Chase is pretty freaking good. So that would not scare me off of Chase, but it may shovel a little bit extra volume over to T. So between Odell, T, and Akers, I have T number one personally.
Yeah. The reports I've seen are that Jalen Ramsey is like sort of advocating to shadow Jamar Chase, but that he'll do whatever the coaches ask of him. So there might be something to that. There might not. So again, one of those spots where we can present the information, but historically I'm not like that means he's shadowing.
They haven't done it all this year. Like it's been twice. I think 2 total games they've used him in that fashion.
The piece I read said that he actually didn't shadow anyone. So it depends on how you define it.
I think he had DK and then Evans during the postseason because they had no one else. T. Higgins is better than Scotty Miller. Again, no shade of Scotty Miller. No shots. And Tyler Johnson, no shots.
Yeah.
But T. Higgins is pretty freaking good. So I think it's a different situation than that was. But I do think that's worth noting from my perspective. Okay, let's move down to the value tier. We've got, the kickers are whatever. If you like the Bengals to win the game, if you think it's lower scoring, McPherson makes sense. Same thing on the reverse for Matt Gay. Let's talk about the value plays. Tyler Boyd on down. Boyd, $8,500. Darrell Henderson's $8,000. Probably not going to get there, despite the fact I think he'll work in. I would just expect him more to nullify Akers and Michelle a bit. Although it's weird that he's higher salary than Michelle. Kind of strange, but anyway. Kendall Blanton, $8,000. Higby 8,000 if he plays. Michelle 75. Uzama 75 if he plays. Van is 7,000, and then things drop off from there. What is your view of the value plays? Anyone stand out to you? Just general read on that tier.
So it's strange because I'm leaning toward the Rams to win this game. So that's going to sort of constitute the majority of my lineups. Although, if I'm being honest with myself, I bet against myself a lot when I build single game lineups based on what I expect and what I think. Because I assume most people will expect that the Rams, as 4-point favorites, 4.5-point favorites, depending, that they're going to be the better plays. I think that's the case, but I also know enough in terms of volatility that I'm okay going against my instinct here and trying to gain leverage, which is why we're talking about Mixon and MVP. I think Tyler Boyd is very interesting because if you want to look at like, I don't get a whole lot of like, Jim's gonna tear me apart for this, but like I don't have like an emotional connection to sports very often. But when I think about the Super Bowl, I think about like the X factor and like who can step up and make like 3 plays for his team, who's not like a key primary player. I think Tyler Boyd is really interesting because he from the slot could sort of get forgotten about here. This is not, I hate like total yardage stats, but if you remove tight ends, Boyd ranks behind only Cooper Kupp in yards from the slot across the full season, including playoffs. So again, it's volume based, but like he has a role with his team. His average route depth from the slot was 11 yards, according to Next Gen Stats, which was 5th best among pass catchers with at least 50 slot targets. He can be bucketed into like this. He's just a slot guy, but like he's not just a slot guy. He has, like, we've seen him break some plays. I think that he could get overlooked. And for his salary, he's someone who I'm trying to be definitely overweight on against the field. So have a little bit more Tyler Boyd because that also goes right against the Jamar Chase lineups, right against the T. Higgins lineups. It's nothing against those guys. Again, this is how it's impossible to talk about a single game and say, I like Tyler Boyd because that obviously means in that particular lineup, I'm going against Jamar Chase. It's not anything against Jamar Chase, but I think Tyler Boyd is pretty appealing to me at a salary of 8,500, which is lower than both kickers.
Would you say he is the best value play? $8,500 or lower?
Let me sort here real fast, but I think so.
I think he is too.
I think it's pretty, yeah.
I think by a decent margin if I assume Higby is not fully healthy.
Well, I'm also assuming CJ Uzama is not fully healthy.
And that bumps up Boyd's target projection.
Target projection, middle of the field usage.
Yeah.
Again, CJ Uzama's, he said he wants to play. He's probably going to be out there. I don't know if he'll be super effective.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be. Like, I think he'll play. I don't think he'll play well. Like,
he also might not play.
I love CJ Uzama. Yes. He's awesome.
Yeah, and he might not play as usual snap rate, run as usual number of routes. So I think that
like Drew Sample's not taking targets from Tyler Boyd, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins.
Right. So I think Tyler Boyd is going to be a key piece for me. Mm-hmm. And I feel pretty solid in that. Now we'll have to see how the Jalen Ramsey stuff shakes out because their slot data is like,
I don't think he'll be there.
Right. So like, I don't know what their non-Ramsey slot numbers look like.
Yeah.
But I think Tyler Boyd in the middle of the field could have like a 5-catch, 80-yard game. And that could be enough if this game does end up being a little bit lower scoring than the total. Yeah,
Boyd during the playoffs, 14% target share, but 29% of the red zone targets. I believe that's across 7 total targets. So he means he has 2. No, it'd be 3. Wait, no, it can't be 7. Anyway, whatever. I don't know math. Let me see if I have that number in here, actually. It's out of 14. He has 4 out of 14 red zone targets. I actually had the number in the Excel data. So, okay. 4 out of 14 red zone targets for Tyler Boyd. He doesn't have any deep targets, but like that touchdown from Burrow where they had like the fake whistle against the Raiders, that was like a downfield throw, even if it wasn't like a quote unquote deep target because it wasn't 16 plus air yards. So he can get some downfield work. I think he's awesome for this slate, and I am very on board there. The other guy I like down here, I mentioned Michelle before. I'm okay with him. But Van Jefferson is $7,000. I like when I first opened up this tab, I had to like record a value play segment. I was like, okay, I'll talk up Kendall Blanton because he's going to run a lot of routes. No Higby. Saw that Blanton was 8,000 while Van was like 7,000 and said nope, and immediately erased him from my sheet because I don't get that. Van's role has sucked during the playoffs. He's at a 10% or 9% target share. It's been bad, but he's been hurt. And Tyler Higby probably not going to be fully healthy if he plays. Van, we've seen this year that he can get downfield work. And even during the playoffs, he's tied with Odell for second on the team in deep targets at 24%. He can convert on that. I think that Van behind Boyd is number 2, followed by Michelle, followed by then probably Blanton among the like lower salary guys. Again, if we assume Higby does not go, the downfield work is good. Make it a target bump. I would know Higby 2 weeks to rest up that knee and his shoulder as well. I think Van is number 2 behind Boyd for me, despite the fact that his floor is non-existent.
Yeah, I mean that's what you're kind of getting. That's what you're looking at for players down at this salary range. But if you tell me like I could play Samaje Perine or Van Jefferson, I'm just gonna roll the dice on Van Jefferson, who gets plenty of downfield work for what his role is. I think his ADOT was like 24 yards last week. I knew I was gonna say last week.
It was on 5 targets too. Like it wasn't one target. He had 5 targets.
2 weeks ago, last game. But Cincinnati, their league average in passing ADOT allowed, so that they don't necessarily allow a lot of downfield passing or deny it. But on downfield passes, they're 25th in yards per target allowed. And again, it goes back to something I talked about a while ago. You can't really predict big games from receivers because you can't predict things like catch rate. If Van catches 3, if he gets 3 downfield targets, catches 2 of them, maybe all 3 of them, like that is not, that's not a crazy thing you have to sell yourself on. You're still banking on low volume, but you're saying, hey, this team has, given up a high yards per target number a lot on downfield passes. I think therefore, Van is going to run out there. He's going to get his 2 or 3 downfield targets, maybe something else. That for us, and I say this all the time, just one is not enough on a main slate. Like it's not. On a single game slate, it can be. And I think that Van probably has like 1 or 2 deep shots at the minimum here. So I think Van is very much in play. I would still have to rank Tyler Boyd above him because Boyd's going to have a better role. He still has, I think, some downfield work, and he has a path, honestly, to a weird volume-based good role. Because again,
he has a volume-based ceiling, I would say.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So I'm going to rank Boyd over Van, and then it would be Sony, and I probably won't take a whole lot of stabs. So if this is like your first time, I don't know. I'll see if you have any thoughts, and then I'll kind of round up the rest of the value plays.
So there was a tweet today from Cameron DeSilva saying that Darrell Henderson Jr. will play, and they're expected to ride the hot hand based on how the game unfolds.
Yikes.
I think that is bad for Akers primarily, but also maybe I should use some Henderson a little bit, maybe be a bit lower on Michelle, but I think that's at least we're bringing up here that was the case. I think with Van, other thing too to consider is they're indoors. We typically bump up the odds of deep shot hits when they're playing indoors because there's no wind to contend with. We talk about high ADOT receivers at home indoors, and he checks those boxes. We talk about that for a full slate. This is a single game slate. So I think Van at 7,000, like we talked about one lineup, you get one tournament lineup. I mix in an MVP, and Van might be the second guy I put in just because the salary is so good. Maybe I don't have to actually. Yeah. Because Mixon's salary is pretty reasonable. Anyway, I might be able to go with just Boyd there, but I think the Van would be, if I couldn't get to Boyd, I think Van would be the number 2 consideration for that slot. Okay, let's open things up here on the lower end. We were I think my first reaction, Brandon, when opening up the player pool was that salaries were relaxed. Is the way I would phrase it. Where I don't think I need to be like, oh yeah, this is the Chris Evans game where he turns his one target into a 60-yard touchdown, which he'll probably do now. Oh man, Drew Sample, 2nd round pick. Heck yeah, man, let's go. Ben Skoranek, he almost caught a touchdown. Almost being the operative phrase there. I don't see the value in taking a lot of shots. I would prefer to be more balanced and keep Van as kind of like my floor, because the other thing too is this is not a super low scoring slate where a touchdown from a rando is going to get them in the top 5 in the optimal lineup. You need a bit more juice. So to me, I think I want to keep my floor at Van and not go totally crazy. You can be different without dipping down there. You don't have to get stupid to be different. So I think that's my perspective on this. Do you have any differing takes there?
No, that's one thing I was going to say. If this is like your first single game slate on FanDuel, like historically, yeah, if a low salary play scores a touchdown or has like a long catch, that can be enough then to unlock a heavy like Cup, Stafford, Chase stack, and you just play a Ben Skoranek or a Kendall Blanton, and these guys score, have a big play again. Like it's possible, but across the lineups in my sample, if you look at the entire sample of players, and then you look at how many of those had a salary of 6,500 or lower, it's about 8.5%, which is not negligible. It's not. I guess closer to 9%, but it's not negligible. But 1 out of 10, players in a perfect are going to be that low salaried.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, is this the type of game for it?
Yeah, like how many of those $6,500 or lower guys had actual roles? For this game, the answer is 0.
Right.
And like for other ones, they may have.
And there's a difference between an optimal lineup. That's a big flaw with optimal lineups is you could take someone who's not really in consideration, who maybe gets a role because of an injury or something like that, with like a Kendall Blanton that we saw with Tyler Higby leaving first thing. But again, it's not like you can never justify players with a salary this low. You probably don't have to, unless you see something that we don't. And I really don't see the case for any of these guys because, as you mentioned, the salaries are pretty reasonable for a Michelle, a Darrell Henderson, a Tyler Boyd, a Van. So like, I'm not going to be digging down here. I don't feel fearful and not having some options down there because
Trent Taylor's not making me shake my boots at night.
Right. So the only reason to do that is you say, look, it's going to be Stafford, Burrow going back and forth, and they're going to be throwing only to Cooper Kupp and Jamar Chase. And if I want all them, I can't even do that. But point being is like, unless you're saying only the top 3 guys are going to have anything worthwhile and nobody else is going to have any production of merit, I might as well just burn the salary and roster Ben Skoranek. That does not seem reasonable for this week.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. Okay. Any final thoughts for you, Brandon, for Super Bowl 56 that you want to get off your chest before we send off the good people to fill out their lineups?
I think I covered everything. Kickers are in optimals in comparable games about the same rate, about 35%. It's about 34% for the full sample. So I think they're fine plays. They're value plays we didn't really talk about. So about 35% likely to have a kicker in a lineup. I think it's reasonable. And in that case, probably just go with whoever you think is going to win the game. But I try to avoid kickers mostly whenever I think they're going to be any number of points scored.
Yeah, and that'll probably happen here on Sunday. All right, that is all that we have here for today and for this year on the NFL side of things over on the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. But the beat rolls on because we have our PGA podcast every Tuesday, 10 a.m. on the FanDuel YouTube page and up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast. We'd have that NASCAR back next week with the duels at Daytona and the Daytona 500. That should be a lot of fun. Of course, Tom Vecchio has you covered for NBA and NHL, DFS every weekday, and Austin Swaim is on the UFC side of things. So make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. Brandon, if you have any questions for yourself, if people have any questions for you, where can they find you on Twitter?
Well, I do tweet questions at myself a lot.
Too. I've realized that's like a writing flaw that I have is like setting up myself with a question. I realize I need to cut that out. It annoys me.
Like a straw man question?
Not really. It's just like in my writing. Sorry, you probably read
last
this.
Show of the year. People
they logged out.
They know where to find us on Twitter.
Oh wait, Should we omit Cam Akers from our lineups? No. But should we be lower on the field than him? Yes. Like that structure, I use that structure too much, and I'm trying really hard to cut it out because it's super annoying.
I think it has its place.
It has its place, but if it's too many places, it gets annoying. So I'm trying to trim it down a little bit.
I can see that.
Anyway, Twitter.
At Godula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcasts. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in for today and this year. Good luck to you in Super Bowl 56. We'll talk to you once again soon for some PGA and NASCAR coverage. This has been a Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.